mean, I say this to students on day one when they start with us. The degree you're starting today, when you finish in 4 years' time, will be completely different, and the world will be completely different to what it is today. And what we need to do with you is to make sure that you are able, flexible and adaptable and agile to meet the challenges when you graduate in 4 years' time. And that to me is the key.
This is Reimagining Higher Education, your go-to podcast with remarkable education leaders sharing personal stories from their experience in and around the sector, including reflection and hope for progress in the sector. With your host, Dr. Ashraf Mahate, consultant in the areas of international trade, export promotion, inward investment attraction and entrepreneurship, Fellow of the Royal Society of Arts, and member on Studiosity's Academic Advisory Board. Welcome.
Today, I'm delighted, honored, and extremely pleased to be joined by Professor Ciarán Ó Catháin, who is the CEO of Bahrain Polytechnic, a distinguished leader whose insights and experience are helping to redefine education in the Middle East. So, welcome, Professor Ciarán. Pleasure having you on this podcast.
I'm delighted to be with you today and looking forward to having our conversation over the next 30 to 40 minutes.
So am I, yes. I mean, I've looked at your very distinguished CV. It's amazing. And also the wonderful achievements that you have accomplished at Bahrain Polytechnic. And I always think that leadership style comes from their own personal experiences, reflecting on your own journey to this executive role. How have your own personal experiences, convictions, struggles, helped you shape as a learner and then later on as an educator and a leader?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. I mean, I suppose for me, I grew up in a working class environment in Dublin. Was the first of my family that went into higher education. I actually started when I finished my high school diploma. I actually went in and I did a chef apprentice program, believe it or not. And then I transitioned from it into hospitality and tourism management, and from there into education. And I did a postgrad in finance. I did a postgrad in education. I did a master's in Trinity College. I did a master's with the University of Ulster in leadership. And then I finished a PhD with the University of Ulster in organizational change. So it was not a typical academic route, because on the other side of it, I was always a businessman. I was always a very entrepreneurial in terms of all of the roles that I have done. But I've found myself now over 38 years now leading higher education institutions, both public and indeed private sector. Mainly in the public sector, both with an American university in Strasbourg, with the Northern Ireland Hospitality and Tourism College in Portrush, and then in Athlone as the president of the Athlone Institute of Technology, now the Technological University of the Shannons Midlands Midwest, which I was the founding as a father in terms of establishing that institution. And then I've come here to Bahrain to work in the Middle East since 2022 and taken on a different role to drive change and the philosophy that I have in terms of education.
It's amazing. You mentioned that wonderful word, philosophy, right? Without this educational philosophy, we as educators are walking in the dark, right? So what's been your educational philosophy?
I mean, my philosophy, I suppose, can be wrapped up very easily in terms of, we use the slogan here, Polytechnic for all. It's trying to have a door open for everybody and a step on a ladder that they can progress and that they can develop and they can evolve to achieve what's their maximum goal. And for some of those students, it may be, a level 6 or it may be a diploma. For others, it can be a PhD. But it's how we celebrate that achievement and the philosophy that we have around bringing people in, making them feel at home, making them feel that the gates of a higher education institution are not to be climbed over, but to come in and be part of the philosophy, and that create that family atmosphere that's here to support and develop all of the individuals to the extent that they can be developed and want to be developed.
You said university for all. I think both of us have lived through that generation in the UK when polytechnics became universities, right?
Yes.
And colleges became universities.
Yeah.
This whole idea that we have to give everybody a degree.
Yeah.
How do you subscribe to that concept that we have to give everybody a degree? And how does that marry with the idea about giving vocational education?
Yeah. I mean, for me, I don't subscribe to that. I don't think necessarily everybody has a degree, but I do think everybody has an opportunity and a chance. So here in Bahrain, I mean, we have, we've had a discussion, should we become, a university? And certainly in my discussions here with the leadership in Bahrain was no, because they don't want to repeat what happened in the UK in terms of everybody becoming a university. And then, what was the outcome of that? Yes, there was some economic outputs in the early stages. Then you got the elitism going into the Russell Group and so on. And certainly that would not be the philosophy that I would be ascribing to. But what we're looking at here is, for example, some of the things that we've done here is we put in a top-up program for people who had a level 6 qualification or a diploma qualification, who for their own job and for their own opportunities wanted to progress. So we put in a system in there how we looked at what their qualifications were. We looked at the years' experience that they had. We matched it against our own criteria, and then we were able to bring them in and bring them through a very successful 2 years to give them their degree. And that has been hugely successful both for Bahrain, but also for the Eastern Province in Saudi Arabia, where currently we would have 1,500 to 2,000 students actually on that program currently in a number of disciplines, but mainly in the engineering and ICT fields. So again, whereas before there was a blockage there for them to be able to do this, we unblocked that and made sure from an academic perspective that we met the credibility, so that we looked at where they were, and we put in place a very simple plan that would transgress them across from being a diploma holder now to having degrees. And there's a number of them now actually coming through now who have got, again, the bit between their teeth. They want to come back into education, and now they want to go on and continue into masters. So we've opened that. And on the other side, then for those students who we don't want necessarily to do a degree, because here in the Middle East, there's still a huge demand for people with good technical skills. So we put in a level 6 program, say, as an apprenticeship route in terms of motor vehicle, electrical, plumbing, air conditioning, paint and body repair, in ICT, and indeed in retail. And we're looking at other areas that we will develop this year, possibly into hospitality. But it's giving people a different route into a higher education institution. And it's also then later on giving them the opportunity to continue on the step of their journey, but depending on what they want to do. And that's when we talk about this philosophy for me around, Polytechnic for All, is having different groups coming in at different stages that can come in and feel they're part of the community and learning. And the motto we use in terms of the apprenticeship is earn and learn. And we work very closely with industry to make sure what we're delivering from the academic side matches what they're doing on the practical side as well. So that's the philosophy when we talk about opening the doors. We also do lots of top-up work for industry in terms of putting in modules, whether they're micro credentials in areas that they feel that their companies need, that they want a bit of more expertise. We're doing that. And we've also actually been doing in the last number of months now a sort of an open door policy in terms of doing introduction programs on AI and that for students, for parents, for industry, and indeed for some of the government agencies. But it's open to anybody who wants to come in as a community gesture from our side, to get them in and let them feel, again, one, that they can come inside the Polytechnic, but two, then we're giving something back to the community that's so important.
I noticed you mentioned those two wonderful words that I always have to talk about, called AI, but I'll come to that in a minute. But what
Sure.
I really love is this whole idea about education when you need it and how you need it, right? Because we're not all the same. We don't all have to come to university at the age of 18 and 19, spend 3 or 4 years, get a degree, do a master's. We're not a conveyor belt, right? We are all individual. We all have commitments. And I like this whole idea that how you offer very personalized learning, which is both vocational and also linked to industry, right? How do you make the industry linkages?
Okay, well, I mean, the industry linkages are the critical piece for us. I mean, my philosophy here is what I call the three C's, the agility model, where we have co-governance, we have co-creation and co-delivery. So on the co-governance, my board is made up of over 50% of industry. Every program has an industry advisory board that feeds into the curriculum on a twice yearly basis around looking at what we're teaching. Second of all, then, is around co-creation. So I don't believe that we're the panacea, that we have everything in a particular polytechnic or indeed in any university that have all of the skill set. We need our industry partners to be involved in terms of looking at the curriculum. And I know some people, when I discussed this at many conferences, people said to me, oh no, but I mean, we are academics, we should be able to design the curriculum and we should be, nobody else should have any input into it. Well, I don't ascribe to that philosophy. My philosophy is, this is what we're trying to create students that are be employable and have employment skills for the industry here in Bahrain. So therefore we have that co-creation of the syllabus. They sit with us, they join with us, they amend what we want to think or what we think, but they're also bringing that practicality into our discourse and into our curriculum development. And then the third part of the 3Cs one for me is around co-delivery, where we get industry involved, coming in on a significant number of guest lecturers on final year projects. They partner with us and with the students as a mentoring system. So they're involved in that 360 around, from the governance side to the co-creation, and then in terms of the co-delivery. And I think that is why, and I mean, here in Bahrain, like, we have 76% of our graduates employed within 6 to 9 months of completing their program, because of that link with industry, and particularly around the final year projects, where they're all done based from industry and based on an industry requirement. So industry get to know the student, they get to know their capabilities, and then 9 times out of 10 we're seeing them being offered employment before they actually finish the project. And to me, one of the things that I've always done, both here indeed and in Ireland, and when I worked in the north of Ireland, is have that real critical engagement with industry, because without it, I think we can become very much an ivory tower, believing in our own bubble of how wonderful we all are and how great we are. The reality for me is how industry perceive us, how parents perceive us. And I, in here in Bahrain, where we are, I mean, when I took over the Polytechnic in 2022, we had less than 3,000 students. This September coming, we'll be close to 15,000 students. Getting 9 to 10,000 applicants per year now, because parents are now voting with their feet, because they're saying they want their children in the Polytechnic because of that closeness to industry, because industry love what we do, and that alignment that we have with our curriculum and with industry, which keeps us relevant and keeps us fresh. And I think this is one of the critical things for me in terms of how you keep your links with industry, keep them all on board. And by doing what we're doing, this is what we're doing. So, for example, last week we launched, our new applied masters by research and PhD programs by research. And again, in all areas, these programs and the subject areas are defined by industry. They're industry world problems that they have, or a solution that they're looking for. And all of the programs are endorsed and will be co-supervised by the academics on one side, but also on an industry academic or an industry person on the other side who has an academic background at PhD level. So that co-supervision will be there. But again, it's working in an applied nature, resolving a problem, whether it's an industry-specific problem or a world-specific problem, that they're real live projects. And they're not just in terms of, we're not into blue skies thinking per se, because that's not our remit. Our remit is about work-ready graduates around working and supporting industry. And what better way can you support industry by creating an avenue to create knowledge creators rather than looking for knowledge givers all of the time. And, in Bahrain, one of the things that has been missing probably is around that significant input in terms of R&D. And we now are responding to what the industry has asked us by saying, yes, we can become your R&D arm, and you will work with us in terms of, again, defining what the projects are, defining what the topics you want us to do, and working with us to select the candidates that will best fit to the culture of your organization to fit in with what we're trying to achieve. So again, it's industry at the heart, but again, it's also opening and diversifying our own routes and where we want to go.
That's amazing. I mean, in 4 years, you've done 5x.
Yes.
Having worked in academia for several decades, I know that's not an easy feat. And recruiting students is perhaps one of the most difficult things. And I also love the fact that you said it's work-ready students. But I now wonder, in the world where we live with AI, a lot of these jobs will disappear, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So how do you ensure that your students are not only work-ready, but fit for the future? Right? Because I see this as a major challenge that vocational-based institutions face?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. But if you look at sort of, if you look at the World Economic Forum's areas of where they're looking at in terms of the jobs of the future, the jobs that are going to be there, it's very much in terms of some of the areas that we're working on. There are certain areas. I mean, for example, if you take accounting, certainly the accounting is changing very significantly to what it was. A lot of the top four companies are reducing the numbers they take in year on year because AI now is doing that work, that manual work that the trainees used to do. So there is a dynamic changing. What we're trying to do in terms of all of the curriculum is to make sure we keep it fresh and keep it close to what industry are requiring. And that requires a lot of work from an academic side and from a quality assurance side to make sure that that loop is being continually closed and the input comes in. The second thing that we're doing with our students is to ensure that they understand that the degree today and when they graduate is only a stepping stone, that they will continue to need, whether it's micro-credentials or whether they need to continue following up, and that the Polytechnic will be their partner for life in terms of development and the continuous development them on their career route. And that's the key piece to it as well. And I think, I have seen students think, well, I have my degree, so I don't have to do anything else. The degree is only as good as what's written on the paper for that day because the world is moving on. So what we've been trying to achieve here, I mean, when we developed our first degree in AI, for example, the only thing we could do was the first semester was the only subject areas that could be agreed. And we had agreed this with the external validators of the program as well, because there was no point writing a 4-year honours degree in AI because again, you get to the end of year one, it has gone, it's obsolete because of the changes that are happening, and they're happening at such a rapid pace. So the curriculum had to be able to reflect that. And so therefore, that's what we were doing in terms of designing the curriculum nearly on the go, in the sense that you were developing it as it's required, compared to the traditional model where you would develop your 4-year degree, you put it through your external panel, you get your validation, and you move on. So we keep all of our accreditation and all of our syllabuses regularly reviewed on a quarterly basis to see, particularly with industry, is this what you want? So what I'm saying is, in terms of, yes, we are producing work-ready graduates, but we're also giving them a skill set that they understand that they will need to refresh that. They need to keep themselves up to date, particularly in the world we're living in today in terms of micro-credentials. On the flip side of it, if you listen to the CEO of Nevada, where he's saying, the millionaires of tomorrow will be electricians, plumbers, and those with the skill set. So we're doing that as well. And, when I say to parents here, oh, my child needs to have a degree, and I'm saying, why? I'm saying to them, you see students coming out with a degree. If you look in Europe, they're coming out maybe getting 25, 30,000. You see plumbers earning 60 to 70,000. And with the apprenticeships, one of the other key things we're doing is we want to make sure that during the 3 years when they're with us and when they're out in the blocks of industry, is we're trying to create a philosophy with them that they may become employers rather than employees. So we're giving them that skill set to be able to become entrepreneurs. And in some instances, we hope in some of the companies that they're currently working in, when they finish, we'll have the first batch finishing next year, that some of them may be able to set up their own companies and then do subcontract work for some of the companies that they're currently working for. So again, it's trying to create that whole entrepreneurship, that innovation piece. But again, it's around keeping their skill set fresh and up to what is required by industry.
It's amazing. I mean, I love it when I hear educators talking, or as educational leaders talking about creating entrepreneurs. Because for me, as an economist, I find that the economic impact of that is far greater, right? Because as an employee, you produce X, but as an employer, it's magnified and it's multiplied many times over. But the other thing I want to pick up on is you talked about quality. And in today's world, the quality of assessing the quality of learner work has become more difficult.
Indeed.
When we did exams, we had only 2 sources of reference, the lecturer and the library. And the lecturer knew most of the books, so you really couldn't plagiarize. You could paraphrase, but you couldn't plagiarize. And today you have these wonderful things called Gen AI and agentic AI, and you can do lots of wonderful things. You have classes where students can photograph exam papers, send them back, get the answers. So the question then becomes, how do you as an institution actually evaluate the learning journey when you have one project-based assignment or you have an exam, how do you then look at assessing this, knowing that there's a probability that they may have received external unverified assistance?
Yeah. I mean, I think for us, I mean, our curriculum and our assessment is problem-based learning. I mean, we're very much into that thing. So there's a lot of group dynamic, there's a lot of individual learning, and they're coming together in it. One of the things that we have said, and we've developed a very good, I think, comprehensive AI policy that looks across the Polytechnic and its faculties. I mean, for me, and discussing this with all of the faculties, I said to them, we can't bury our heads in the sand and think, this is not going to happen. This is going to happen. So there are 2 or 3 things that we need to do. We need to be teaching students, yes, how to use AI. We need to make sure they understand how they're using it ethically. And thirdly, most importantly, they need to then reference it if that's what they're using. And we need then to assure then that our assessment mechanism reflects that. So if we're finding an assessment comes in and it's 80% has been produced by, whether it's one of the AI tools that has to be notified, and then we will mark accordingly. But we've got to do this. And in fact, only on the last day when we were talking, I had come from academic council where we had just accepted the results for the final examinations this year. And at the opening of the meeting, that was my discussion around, how can we ensure that around the AI piece. So some of the things that the faculties are now doing is, particularly in terms of final year students and in third year students, they're doing much more sort of Viva type operative. So the student puts in their assignment, then there'll be a discussion around the assignment. And that's where you will really get to know whether the student really understands what he submitted or this is coming from some other source. And if it's coming from some other source, then you flush this out as part of that Viva part of it, and that sort of interrogation or defense or whatever you want to call it. So we're finding that is really helping us significantly. And I think the students are beginning to realize, yes, I can note down that we did this. I can note down this is the ones that we're using, and then we can talk around it. And it's to make sure, for me, it's to make sure that the students understand what they're submitting and where their sources are. And I mean, it's a real challenge, and I think it's going to become a bigger challenge for higher education. The higher education system is changing and it's evolving. AI is there, and it's not going to go away. But what we need to do, from an industry perspective as well, when we spoke with industry last year when we were reviewing our strategic plan, was to make sure that students know how to use the tools there, but they also know how to use the tools in an ethical way that supports sort of their credibility as going to be an employee at a future date. So there's a balance to be had around, yes, they've got to be able to use the tools, but more importantly, they've got to be able to use it ethically and not try and pass that off as something that's not their own work. And the only way now that you can do that, like traditionally with an essay, you can put it in and you can test it out, and then they'll come back saying 20% match or 70% match or 20%, and then immediately like there's a plagiarism piece going on here. With the AI, it's not necessarily going to produce that. So for us, one of the ways that we're trying to do that is around how we do the defense, how we can see that the student really understand what they're doing, do they understand the makeup of it. And in some cases, I'm seeing my colleagues are doing stuff in terms of, putting in little things into spreadsheets to see can students actually identify that there's an error or there's a problem in it that necessarily the AI tools won't pick up on either. So it's a way of doing it, but it's a real challenge for our educators of tomorrow, and how we keep our academic staff up to date in terms of what's happening. As you said, in our day, you had the academic who was who had all of the knowledge, and we accepted he had all of the knowledge, and then we would have read the books that they would have known. They would have known it. Now now, as I had to say to our academic staff, we're now facilitators of learning. There's so many other channels that are going to feed in. And in some cases, particularly, for example, when I see some of our students coming in on the top of programs with 20 years experience in industry, they have a wealth of knowledge, and it's how we capture that knowledge into the classroom. So we're becoming, as academics, you're becoming more of a facilitator in the classroom of that learning and of that knowledge. And you're trying to bring in how you bring all of that together into that dynamic of a classroom has changed significantly from when it was just purely chalk and talk. And I think with problem-based learning now, where they're working on real live industry projects, it helps in a sense of how we as an institution manage in terms of retaining the quality and making sure that the graduates really do have that skill set. And, the graduate attributes this year, we've done a lot of work this year on our graduate attributes to see, are we still in line? We've identified gaps, But rather than rewriting them, what we've done, we've rewritten some of the areas around the understanding of what that means, so that we can bring in more of the things that we wanted more in, say, for example, whether it's around AI or whether it's around critical thinking or creative thinking, getting that more into it as well, so people can understand the importance of it. And even when I'm talking with students, like one of the things I would always say to students, around, it's all very well if you put in something from AI and it's flushed out, but where are you going to develop your critical skill set? Where are you going to develop your own creativity? How is it going to help you in terms of your overall innovation, or where you want to be in terms of your career? Like if you build your career on a false deck of cards, it will fall. If you build your education on a sound foundation, it will build and will flourish and will grow. And that's the piece you've got to match from a quality perspective, but also as an education provider, in terms of what are we building the future of our students on? Is it on a solid foundation, or is it on a deck of cards that can fall at any change in the wind will blow it down? Whereas if you give them the fundamentals, you give them the tools to be able to understand and use AI respectively and ethically, then I think we will win out in the end. But it is a big challenge.
I actually love what you said about problem-based learning. In fact, when I did my teaching qualification, I actually did research on problem-based learning. I think it's a wonderful tool. And I think actually takes a student away from a normal chalk and talk environment to one which gives them practical skills. And I also love the idea that you do vivas, because when we were studying and when I was studying, it was called reading a subject, right? Because you
Yes,
actually had
yes,
to
of course.
read.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
said,
yeah.
I'm reading, in my case, economics. I was reading economics at university. I was never studying economics. You always had to read books, right? And reading was a fundamental aspect, right? We had very few hours in the lecture room, but a lot of hours of private reading. And now I find that when we start using these alternative mechanisms to check the integrity of student work, the difficulty becomes scaling up. Because if you have 15,000 students and then they're doing 4 subjects a semester, whatever, that's immediately 60,000 vivas, right? Scaling that up and doing that in a large batch processing is extremely time consuming, extremely expensive, and not feasible for all universities.
No, and it's not feasible. I mean, in the sense when you look at it, it's we will concentrate on that really on final year and into the third year. That last semester and third and fourth year, we'll do that. And then what we'll find is that because of the problem-based learning and the way our curriculum is designed and the capstone project discussions within the years, we can do it in some of that, and that takes down the numbers quite significantly in terms of it. And heretofore, to where we would have said all of students doing individual stuff, now we have them working in groups as well. So we have engineers working with the business school, we have marketeers working with them as well. So we're trying to define that the capstone project really, it brings them in as a group, and you get that group dynamic in it. And that came from, when I would go to the final year exhibition of the engineering stuff, and some of the work would blow me away in terms of the ingenuity, the innovation that was there, until you would ask some of the students, what will it cost to produce this? If we want to commercialize this, what is it? And then I found there was a real gap in the knowledge of the engineers. So we have changed that now. So we're trying to get the engineers to have some knowledge in the business, but now in terms of some of the capstone projects, some of the business students will work with them. So you'll have somebody on that team who'll be able to answer all of those questions around what it costs to make, what it will cost if we want to scale it up, and where we can do it, whether we do it in Bahrain or whether we're looking at doing it, whether it's in China or wherever, that do it just to scale up and see. So there's that piece there. But not all universities are going to be able to do this. But the question for me and the question for the future of higher education would be, how then do we ensure the integrity of the quality of the qualifications that we give? And how can we be better than, we would have said in years gone by, these ones online that you can do and you produce, you pay your money and you get your certificate. Higher education institutions can't do that. It has to be more, the sum of the parts have got to be more. So I think for us, with our problem-based learning, with our student-centered approach to learning, with our closest industry, we have the 3 sets there that work really well to shape the mind of that young 18-year-old coming into us, to make sure that they really understand the dynamic, that what the learning process is about. And I think that will be key, and it'll be the key for us going into the future of how we stay in, and how, with that, as you say, that ramping up from 3,000 out to 15,000, the changes that it's make. But it has also meant for us too, we have had to increase very significantly the number of academics that we have on site. We have to train every one of them every year. They come in terms of, because you're taking people from traditional universities who are used to reading per se. We have to teach them then in terms of the work-based learning and how our approach is. We have to do a lot of mentoring that, but working quite successfully. And I think what I find with some of our academics, that when you say to them, we're problem-based learning, and they get into it, they really begin to enjoy it. And I've seen some of them saying to me, my teaching is just so much more enjoyable now than it was before in my last university. My last university was mainly chalk and talk, and I did my lecture, the students went off and did their own work. Where here, we're teaching them, we have most of them are in class for 20 hours a week, and they have a practical element and they have the theory, and they have that mix. And with that problem-based learning, they're learning all the time. They're learning natural skill sets in terms of standing up and presenting. They're working in the group dynamic, all of those things that are there that we see in terms of what our philosophy is and what problem-based learning is about. And that, to me, is one of the critical success factors that I'm seeing here in Bahrain. And it's one of the critical success factors that industry say to me, your students are ready when they come out to us.
As I said, I'm a proponent and a strong advocate of problem-based learning. And I always see that when you're doing problem-based learning, it's not teaching, you're actually facilitating. Because in the process, you also learn things from the students.
Absolutely.
But one of the difficulties I've found is, how do you operationalize this and create consistency and coherence throughout the whole degree program or qualification program? It doesn't have to be a degree, because different educators view this differently. Right? Some view it simply as giving a question and now you go and solve it and I'll just sit back. Whereas others are a bit more participatory, providing support. And again, there are many various combinations, permutations in between. How do you ensure consistency? How do you ensure that in this world of AI, that problem-based learning is taught in a much more coherent manner at Bahrain Polytechnic?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the challenges we faced when we started to ramp up, whereas before, we would have had just one group, say, on each subject area. So now we're having 4 or 5 groups. So we have coordinators who are there in terms of the syllabus. So they will coordinate between, whether it's 4 or 5 different people teaching on the program. There will be diversification. They will teach one group and then they teach others. So we get the spread across it. We also have very much a rubric there in terms of how the marking will be done and around the assessments and how many assessments there should be, and that integration of the assessment strategy. So at a faculty level, the coordinators play a critical role in that, in terms of they all use the same template. They will use as much as they can in terms of, here's what we want. Here are the learning outcomes that we want to get from this module, irrespective of who's teaching it. Here's the dynamics that we want to get. Here are the soft skills that need to be in it. And that's where we see it works very well. And we're still keeping, our group still, in most cases, we're still keeping them at around 20 or below 20 in terms of that group dynamic, because once you go over that, you can lose that. But we're still doing that. Now, what in some cases they're doing is that they may have a group of 80 in terms of, and they'll give a lecture which will be around some of the key principles, and then they're back into their groups then of their 20s to do the problem solving and the work-based learning. But in terms of the quality, I think the coordinator and the program managers have a really critical part to play in that, and making sure that it's balanced. And then we use we've a very extensive external examiner process in place as well, who will come in, they'd look at the assignments from before they're actually given. They will take, the view of them. They'll have a helicopter view, but then they'll dive down into taking those at the low end, middle and top end, just to make sure that there's a standard there that is comparable with what's happening in other institutions around the world. And I mean, that's, and that's the critical thing for us. It's around the reputation piece that we do. But when we ramped up, they were some of the critical things that we done. And as I said, one of the other big issues we faced was bringing new staff in who, coming from the traditional side of the house, not understanding problem-based learning, never having used it. We had to put a lot of emphasis into that, and we do a particular program with them in terms of CCTL, in terms of developing their skill set. We do a mentoring approach, and we have a buddy approach system that works with them, particularly during year one when they're with us. And that has helped put it in. And as I say, like, one of the things that struck me was when you see lecturers coming in and say, God, that was a great class. Because, as you say yourself, they're learning too from the students, because the students now have such a broad base. They're looking at things, what's happening, and they're bringing new knowledge into the classroom all of the time. And I think that is the change from, when you and I maybe were in university, that new knowledge really didn't come into play. You were really guided by, as you say, you were reading and you were guided by the lecturer. Now the lecturer is facilitating, and that is really the real change, as I see it, in terms of the shaping of higher education into the future. And I spoke at a conference earlier this year, or late last year, in Riyadh, and I was talking about, around the 3 Cs, around co-governance, co-creation, co-delivery. And I know some of the academics there were astounded that I was saying, you're going to bring industry in to tell us what we should be teaching, or to work with us in teaching. And I'm saying, yes, because I said, they're the ones who are going to employ my graduates. And if my graduates are coming out of the Polytechnic not with the skill set that these people need, they won't be employed. And that's one of the key things that, when I took the role here, I was told, make sure we're producing work-ready graduates with the skill set that our industry in Bahrain and the region needs. And that's the critical piece for us.
That's brilliant. I'd like to return back to one point, going back to your assignments. One of the things with AI, and lecturers have this policing attitude, right? So students always fear that even if they're not using AI, they're always under suspicion, right? And some of the lecturers can get a little bit more extreme and get carried away with their policing activities. How do you get away from lecturers becoming police officers or super cops to actually teaching and mentoring students on how to effectively use AI as a resource, rather than something that they should copy from or rely on?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of what we have done in the last 18 months, we've put on a lot of programs for our own staff in terms of using AI themselves, so they can see the benefit of using the tools, how they can see how ethically they can support what they're doing, how they can support the delivery of some of their modules, how they can, look and support what they would need to be doing in the classroom. And I think part of the issue for me is around making sure that our academic staff really understand how AI can benefit the subject that they're teaching, how it can challenge students ethically in terms of some of the problems that they're putting out, and using the tools that are very supportive, that are being used in industry to support them. So it's around not policing them, or it's around not being afraid of using the tools. But it was difficult to do that when our own staff really didn't have that understanding themselves. So we've had to spend a lot of the last year, in terms of the last 18 months, really, in terms of building up the competency of our own staff around using tools, using AI, and being able to go into the classroom and say, here's a problem, and here's some of the AI tools that you can use, but this is what we want you to use. Yes, by all means, use the tools, but then you need to look at it critically yourself, to do the critical evaluation to see, is that tool giving you what you need? Is it not doing what you need? And how you can, remove all of the chat from the outside and focus in on what the key point is. So that has been very helpful in terms of making sure that our staff not become just the policeman. Traditionally, when they were doing an essay type thing, you put it in to turn it in, we'll give you the thing, and then they say, that's fine. You don't now have that type of turn it in that will do all of the AI. And that's why we've been stressing on making sure that they can use it ethically, make sure that they understand why the tools are there and how important the tools are. But what's more important is that you understand the tool, and you understand how you can do a critical analysis of what's been churned out at you. And that's the piece that we're doing. But it took us a good 18 months to 2 years of getting our own staff up to the level of using AI and not being afraid of AI. Because there were people are traditionally saying, okay, they were very good at problem-based learning, but then all of this now thing is complicating how they're teaching. And I keep saying to them, remember, at the end of the day, we're now facilitating learning. We're not, we don't have it all. and you'll find some students will know more about some of the subject areas than you do because of what they are looking at and how they're using the tools, how they're using AI. But once they understand that you have a very good concept of using AI yourself, and you're saying, here's a tool that can do this, here's a tool that can do that, and here's how it can work together to integrate, say, an assignment or an assessment. But more importantly, then, how then can you make sure that that student understands it? And that's where we come back to that 360 circle of having sort of that defense mechanism where you can actually probe the student to make sure, one, they really understand what they're submitting, and two, they're acknowledging, yes, they did use tools for certain elements of the assessment, particularly in a group dynamic. And then three, in terms of then you can test that they really understand what's in it. And I think that's the piece that's critically important now is, okay, they put in the work. It's not just mark it and say, that's it. It's make sure that they really understand what they're putting in and what they're submitting. And I think that will be the key. And I think over the next number of years, I think we will see much more of that happening around the world in terms of how, as from an academic perspective, that they will move from an academic to a facilitator to facilitate learning, and at the same time be able to incorporate all of the AI tools into the learning process. And that's how then we evaluate the learning process at the end of that will be the challenge for everybody.
I mean, AI is not going to go away, right?
No.
And
No.
AI is just one of the many tools that we now use to learn. I mean, I myself, I've got two daughters, and I see them, using YouTube lectures, using AI to get information. I think the days of chalk and talk, the library, are long dead, right? The lecturer is one medium by which you can acquire information. We have peer networks. I mean, I see a lot of these student-led peer networks. Again, said YouTube lectures on every topic imaginable. And then, of course, there's AI, which answers every single question. Some of it's obviously hallucination, and some of it's false, some of it's real. But you can verify it's, again, I said, in many different ways. But then that raises a question from stakeholders. In your case, you have a good ecosystem of stakeholders. I look at it from the perspective of parents who are paying the fees to send their children to your institution. When they see that your students are using AI, it then questions the value of that degree, right? How do you, as a university, manage that claim that what your students are using AI, so what is the value of that degree if they can get all the information from AI?
Okay, but you see, I think there's more to learning than just using AI. I mean, the AI may be there as a tool, but I mean, that in a sense, what we're doing is facilitating that learning by using them and showing them how they can use this tool to get to the answers. But we're also showing them the way of how they can do it themselves as well. I mean, it's a mix and match in terms of not just coming in and say, oh, well, AI is going to do everything, because if that's the case, why would we need higher education institutions? I mean, what's the critical part for us here is around how they use the AI, how we become the facilitators of the learning, where they can bring all of these things together into the classroom. But we're also developing, the soft skills, the skills where they can present, the skills where they can work in group dynamics, the skills where they can become entrepreneurial, the skills where we can see critical evaluation and critical breakdown of some of the processes that they're looking at. It's all of those things integrated. And AI is not going to be able to do that for you. You need somebody there, sort of that human touch, that can bring all of those things together into a coherent piece. And I think that's what parents are looking for, that the students will be developed, they will mature during this process. Yes, they'll get a great understanding of what AI can do for them, but they'll also have an understanding of, if AI is not there, how they can manage without it. And I think that's the key piece as for educators of the future, because as you said, AI is going to be there. It's going to become more pervasive around what we're doing. And that's why, in fact, we've been doing our program now with parents and everybody else, inviting to come in so they can learn about AI themselves and understand that they're using AI every day in a different way. I mean, I remember saying to somebody recently, when you're a member in one of the supermarkets, you have your card, so your discount store, wherever else. And I said, like, what are they doing in that? They're collecting everything that you buy every week, and they'll do things, and everything that they send you is from an AI bot that will say, oh, they like this, so we've an offer on this, so we'll send to these 200,000 clients, because that's where they will come and buy. And then this penny begins to drop then in terms of how AI is working with them and how it's affecting them. But I think the fundamental thing too for learners is I have no issue with learners learning and using the tools as long as they're acknowledging they're using them and they're using them, as I say, ethically. That is the key piece that we're trying to get and instill in students. But I still think parents, certainly for us here, certainly, our numbers and our applicants are going year up and up and up. More and more of the parents want their children to come into the Polytechnic. And I think that's because of our ethos, our education philosophy, their learning skills that industry want, and they're very receptive. Industry wants to employ them at the other end. So for us, it's the mix of how we do that and how we get people and buy-in. And we get every week we get endorsements from industry around what we're doing, the type of graduates that we're producing. And I mean, we have the highest rate here in Bahrain in terms of graduate employability. And it's on a par with what you'd see around the rest of the world. So to me, it's saying, yes, what we're doing is we're producing the graduates that they want. But the second part of that is to make sure that those students realize that this is just a stepping stone. They still are needed to come back. They're still going to have to do micro credentials. They're going to still have to keep themselves afresh of what's happening in their area. And in some cases, and I've said this to students, I mean, I say this to students on day one when they start with us, the degree you're starting today, when you finish in 4 years' time, will be completely different, and the world will be completely different to what it is today. And what we need to do with you is to make sure that you are able, flexible and adaptable and agile to meet the challenges when you graduate in 4 years' time. And that to me is the key.
I love the way that you bring in the stakeholders and actually teach parents about AI, because that actually makes them understand what are the powers and limitations of AI and where do the students fit in. But I see this whole debate, something that we saw about 35, 40 years ago when calculators were first introduced into the classroom, right? And there was panic from all the maths teachers that we are now going to create a whole generation of students who will not know how to do mathematics, right? And what actually happened was that the core syllabus became more difficult. Instead of learning how to do arithmetic, we now actually learn to do mathematics, right? These things, I think, you can see the repetition of arguments.
Yeah. I mean, what I would say, I mean, I would agree with you. I mean, I would say one of the things, like, as I said, I come from a working class background. And then my father got himself a business, and we had a shop in the business. And, I remember when they got the first till, electronic till into the shop, like, we were quicker mentally adding all the stuff up before the till could even tell you what it is. And then you had others come in who mental arithmetic wasn't good, and they could only do it by putting it all into the machine. And we would say it's £2.50 or it's £3 this or whatever. And they were saying, how can you do that so quick? Because we just had it in our mind. And I think the same here will happen with sort of AI, that you will get this piece that AI will be able to help, but they'll still be able, you'll have other people who still will be able to see and differentiate between, something that's coming out of AI that's not right. And I've been looking recently at some of the, surveying that's been done, particularly in Ireland, around with some of the universities and too, in terms of how AI has been done, and they're doing lots of different work on it. But one of the ones that they looked at, they gave the students just said they were overwhelmed by the data that they were getting, and what they really found difficult was how they were be able to their inability to funnel down that data to pick out the really critical points that they needed to deal on, and the critical points too that were authentic and were real, as opposed to all of that stuff that they think. And I think this will be another piece that we will need to be able to, we will have to do as educators and as facilitators, is to teach students how to filter out some of the stuff that's out there that's not factually correct. The fake news piece and all that, and a lot of fake stuff around education thing, how they can strip that out and really come down to the bare bones of what the issue is. And, I know in some of those surveys, the students said that was the biggest challenge that they had on the particular assignment, was differentiating between what was right, what was wrong, what was true, and what was incorrect. And I think, this is the piece that, we'll have to make sure that students have that ability to decipher that down, to be able to pull out what the critical components are. And I think, as educators and as facilitators, if we don't do that, we will be failing the students of the future.
Absolutely, totally agree with you. Now, let's look at a student. Let's go ahead in time to 10, 20 years ahead. And when the students look back on their degree or their qualification at Bahrain Polytechnic, how do you think they will recall the experience
Well, I think the philosophy that we have is around, as I said, student-centered. It's work-based learning. It's given them a skill set that they will have forever, but the ones that they will have to continue evolve and generate and evolve around. I have been talking, actually, it's funny you asked this question, because I've been talking in the last 2 months to graduates who graduated, the first batch of students who graduated in 2013, 14, and 15. And what is interesting in the context, we had invited a lot of them to come in to show them what we're doing, show them around our new master's programs and around the master's by research and that. And like in talking with those students, they felt the grounding that they got here has allowed them to evolve and to develop into the areas that they're in. And a lot of them have diversified from where they currently were in terms of the degree that they've got in. But the grounding that they got and their ability to be able to look and see and learn differently helped them significantly. And I think if anything in 20 years' time, what I would be hoping for is that the students would say, yes, we had a great time in the Polytechnic. We learned a lot of very good skill sets, but a foundation that was strong and allowed us to evolve and develop as our careers developed. I think that would be the key to me in terms of, rather than say, this stack of cards with no real foundation, and if a wind comes, they're gone. So it's creating a graduate that in 20 years' time can look back and say, well, I did my degree and I graduated in 2026. But since then, I have done, here's the list of 25 micro credentials that I've done. I've done maybe a master's. I may have done a PhD, but I've done lots of stuff that's keeping me employable and helping me in the industry that I'm in. So the piece for me is, how we instill in the student and the graduate that their degree is only as good as the paper it's written on, and that they still will need to evolve and develop both academically and in terms of the skills that they will need to keep themselves fresh and abreast of what's happening around the rest of the world and keeping them ahead of the curve.
I love that. Evolve and develop. I think that's an amazing, amazing concept. Professor Ciarán, it's been an amazing session. I've truly learned a lot. It's been really enjoyable. Thank you so much for your valuable time.
Thank you indeed. I've enjoyed it, sharing my views with you as well. And thank you so much for the time and the opportunity.
You have been listening to Studiosity's podcast, Reimagining Higher Education, candid conversations within higher education, sharing stories of leadership, change, and best practice in teaching and learning. Visit studiosity.com.